truly is a gift to be born like this. It's a challenge. Oh my gosh, it's a challenge. And that is as big as the beautiful parts. I just want to say that and name that.
This is The 1% Heart, a podcast about the millions of people living with congenital heart defects. In this episode, we're going to discuss the impact of medical trauma on mental health, specifically in the CHD community. We have a very special guest today, Meghan Stewart of Hands to Heart Therapy. Meghan is not only a CHD patient, she is a registered clinical counselor in the unceded territories of the many Salish nations known as Vancouver, British Columbia. Some of her many specialties are medical trauma, post-traumatic growth, and attachments. Meghan just finished a thesis on pediatric medical trauma, which I am personally excited to learn all about. But before we get started, here is my quick disclaimer. Nothing here constitutes medical advice. Now let me say that again, even though we are speaking with a therapist, this is not medical advice. These are our own opinions, experiences, and stories. I also like to include a trigger warning, as we're going to discuss medical-related problems and traumas. Listener discretion is always advised. With that out of the way, Meghan, thank you for taking the time to join me here today. You are our second international guest and our first medical professional.
I am so wholeheartedly grateful to meet you, Dresden. Thank you for sharing stories and building conversations about congenital heart conditions. I love how this podcast just really invites brave stories from so many of us. So thank you very much for having me.
And I do feel very lucky with how willing everyone seems to be to tell their stories. So thank you to all the guests that have come before you. Now, I gave you a very high-level introduction. Do you mind walking us through your journey and how it led you to the work you're doing now?
That's a beautiful and huge question. I was born in 1970 when people with congenital heart disease just started to be able to survive. And so I was born blue and limp. My parents found out at my birth that I had tetralogy of Fallot. And so right from my very birth, I started my journey as to where I've ended up today. I now work in British Columbia, Canada, with families and children and individuals on medical trauma. And I work with really a specialized community of youth that was really inspired by my own personal story and my own personal isolation. I wasn't able to have my surgery until I was 4.5 because I just wasn't resilient enough. And at the time, the survival rate for surgeries was really low. So my parents weren't even sure if they were going to allow that or what was going to happen. So lots of early memories of being carried around or playing with other people and then falling asleep, or just really feeling like a little bit on the outside of other children. I hadn't started school yet, but after my heart surgery, I did go to school, and that was also another hardship where I was misunderstood and felt on the margins of others and felt really, really different. I was really, really blessed, though. I had very strong family connections, and my mom taught me to be super proud of my heart scar from my open heart surgery. And so actually I sold tickets to see my scar, which caused quite an uproar in the school. And my mom didn't really care. She just knew that was like a point of pride. And it really, really was. It was a point of pride to me. I was a kid who was frail and different. And now I know that a lot of what I was experiencing was trauma, but even as a really angry teenager and a very defiant and rebellious youth, I didn't know why I had such strong reactions and feelings. So super, super grateful for my journey and grateful for the families and the grounding that I had. I think one of the biggest parts of myself is my imagination, because as a sick kid, I was lying around a lot or in hospital rooms by myself. And so I actually imagined what I would want. And used to fantasize about being a nurse and being able to like really save other people, kind of a superhero complex. Maybe that's why I ended up in the career that I am in now. I really wanted to be other people's hero, and I could really stand in difficult situations when other people would be grossed out or upset or not able to be there. Yeah.
In a conversation I just had with a couple peer mentors of the Adult Congenital Heart Association, they tied CHD patients and their experience to extreme resilience.
Yeah.
So it's funny to hear you say that you could stand situations that most people couldn't, because that's, no matter how different our journeys seem to be, it seems to me that heart patients really come out of it incredibly resilient.
Yeah.
Now, two questions for you. The first is, how much were tickets?
They were 10 cents. And that allowed me, my parents were very strict on sugar and salt. And I really wanted a Revel ice cream, which I don't know if you know what it is. It's a very retro ice cream. And I made enough to have that.
And you mentioned born blue and limp, but you weren't able to have your surgery until 4.5. That is very similar to one of the peer mentors I just spoke to. He was in the States, but he was born. They did not do surgeries on infants at that time. He finally had his operation at 3 or 4. And after that, he seemed to, until his 40s, he seemed to just live a normal life with his, basic cardiac follow-ups. Was that your experience, or did you have multiple surgeries thereafter?
I had a lot of procedures and interventions, and I was followed really closely. And so I don't think that was my experience. I think I felt like they just wanted to keep me alive was a part of all the interventions, because sometimes it would just be catheterizations or just follow-up procedures. But I did develop a pretty serious arrhythmia. And so yeah, I still all throughout my life have had challenges. It's neat that you say that about resilience, because I was told when I was really young I was not going to be able to have children. And it actually ended up that I have 4, 3 that came from my body. And I just was so rebellious. I wanted children really, really badly. That was one of the things I wanted in my world. And I'm really grateful that I was able to do that. But it did actually also impact my body to do that. So like resilient, but also rebellious and able to be in the present moment more, I think, because of what I survived and how I got here.
Yeah, it seems to me that our patients like us are always very aware of how lucky they are to be doing what they're doing.
Absolutely.
So you recently published a thesis on childhood medical trauma. Can you tell me about that, and really any major takeaways that we can either be aware of or use in our day-to-day life?
Yeah, sure. That's a huge and beautiful question. So my research actually started to come up because when I was in my early 20s, I saw a therapist from Children's Hospital in British Columbia, where she suggested that some of my coping mechanisms of like overworking and being being hyper vigilant about safety, that she actually said, "Hey, Megan, have you ever thought that maybe you have PTSD?" And I just went like broadsided, like, me? No, I'm so functional. I deal with all my, I took it as a slam against who I was and how much personal work I'd done. And that came up again and again for me. And then as I was a school teacher before I went back to get my degree again in pediatric medical trauma as a counselor. And I saw other kids having similar stories to me and behaving in ways that I was like, hey, is that kid being misunderstood? Like what actually is going on with that child? So trauma is actually how we understand what's going on. It's not actually the experience. And with medical trauma, especially pediatric medical trauma, kids were seen as, oh, they're resilient. They'll just deal with it and move on with their lives, right? They won't remember because they're really young. But actually, our bodies remember and our nervous systems remember. And we have this like survival. And I'm saying we, like people who have congenital or chronic illnesses, we have these survival instincts. And they're there and they have purpose, but then throughout our lives, if we don't actually have a safe space to be in, to process, that can lead to maladaptive patterns. And I had several of those. I had extreme anxiety myself because I was always feeling unsafe. Even in really safe situations, I would feel that I needed to fight for my own safety. But that actually makes sense because I did fight for my own safety when I was young, throughout my surgical procedures, and also just in day-to-day living with a chronic illness. That was a challenge. So pediatric medical trauma is actually a really recent area of research. And there's still gaps in the academic literature. It's still something that's not forefront in conversations on trauma. So I'm happy that it's beginning to be more of a conversation. And I guess my biggest thing was just a curiosity in how do or people actually move through and become really grounded people after something so large happens to them. Like, what is it about those people? Like, people with congenital heart disease, for example, 50% of us as adults have really serious mental health challenges or like lifestyle issues that are actually psychological because of the physiological experiences and the psychological, actually. Yeah. So I was really curious about how that actually works. How can we support kids now? How can we support ourselves? And part of your podcast is one of the ways we can do that is actually building community and connection and opening these dialogues. I guess I have two takeaways that I'd love to share. And the first takeaway is the importance of building safety and the importance of actually understanding our own nervous system states, and that like a lot of us are either hyper aroused or disconnected in day-to-day life. And so how do I actually support kids with those responses and get to learn about their own nervous systems so that they can regulate themselves and be calm and feel safe, and then have like normal experiences of school and friendship and life and relationships and all of that. And I think the hugest takeaway in building the feeling of safety is relationships. And when a child experiences medical trauma, the whole family system experiences that as well. And I know I've heard you talk about you and your brother and your family, but families go through this. So for me as a counselor, how do I support the whole family system? And then within that, each of those family members, how do they feel about it, and how are they going to support their child so that their child feels safe enough to process their past experiences? Yeah. And I use play a lot for that. Play is a real language for kids. And kids bring the toys. Yeah, it's really cool, actually. You want me to tell you about it?
It's funny is the wrong word, but I'm sitting here trying to not reflect too much on my own experience. But like you said, the family trauma, I've seen that in my folks. But I don't think that patients are told about this early and often enough, and that might have just been my experience. The way I learned about my the way I learned about my mental health and how it ties to CHD, I was on a webinar. I was a panelist on a webinar for the ACHA's mental health webinar. And I thought I was great at mental health because I was open. I talked about like I got diagnosed with ADHD as an adult, and all of a sudden a whole bunch of symptoms made sense. By the way, CHD patients are 8 times more likely to have it, 10 times, some ridiculous number, 16 times. I don't know. Don't quote me on it. And you can, if you watch the clip, when they start talking about how you can have, I always thought I was lucky. I don't remember my first surgery, so I don't have that trauma. And I'm lucky I didn't say that on the episode, because if you watch the clip, you'll see someone mentioning childhood medical trauma, the trauma you don't remember, complex PTSD, CPTSD. And you can see like the wheels turning in my head, like, oh, uh-oh, I'm learning something about myself. I was a panelist at the ACHA's workshop for the CNOC, Cardiac Neurodevelopmental Outcomes Collaborative Conference. And they talked about the heart-mind connection. And being a panelist got me a free ticket, so I went to all the lectures. And the bit of medicine I could understand, I was like, wow, there are a lot of patterns here. Like the things I thought were cool and quirky about me, like hypervigilance, like you mentioned, or I guess generalized anxiety, which I saw as me planning for everything. I'm a planner, My grandmother called me the conductor because I always had a plan and everything, and I kept the trains on time. But I also don't remember a lot of my childhood and growing up, which makes me think, maybe it wasn't me being motivated. Maybe it was me being anxious. Maybe my, overcompensation for ADHD wasn't my motivation. Maybe it was some kind of inferiority complex caused by the heart. And it's amazing how even the traumas you don't remember, which is why I was so excited. Like, I think you replied to a comment talking about your thesis, and the first thing I said was, can I talk to you, please? Because it's amazing how stuff you don't realize can influence you, and how it's not talked about enough in the CHD community. And I just don't want more kids to end up like me, where they don't realize it till they're 25 years old. I want kids to know, because if you don't know you're traumatized, everything you think you perceive in the world as normal. These kids are never going to know that it doesn't have to be that way. They don't have to be stressed. They don't have to forget large chunks of their childhood. But it's coming down to us to take your research and your points and the other factoids and finding a way to give it to parents early. And that's even before mental health is becoming a lot more accepted, yeah, but maybe more common with like millennial and Gen X parents. My parents are boomers. My parents were old when they had me. Like my dad was 45, my mom was 37. I'm sure that they would be open to therapy for me. But if I mentioned to one of them, like, hey, do you think you have some medical trauma from my surgeries? They'd be like, no, I just got through it. I took care of it. Like, okay, I'm not going to disturb that. All that to say, getting this research and making your points, but making it when, it's intervening early, when there's still a chance to stop a lot of the issues from arising. How do we do it? How do we tell parents early? Do we tell the cardiologists? Do we tell the interventionalists? Do we tell the primary cares?
Yeah, and how do we get the message out there? That's a big part of my work right now is actually talking to parents. See sometimes my videos on Instagram and reach out to me and say, "Oh my gosh, actually, it's affecting me as well." And a lot of times I'm ending up seeing parents or siblings, not actually the child, because if you're supporting the attachment, the family, whatever the family is, two moms, whatever, the family, then you are actually securing an attachment for the child. You're building a nest that's safe, and the parents aren't going through quite as much as they could go through if they don't have that support. So that's it. That's interesting you're bringing that up, because there is the parents. A lot of my clients are siblings too, and young siblings who are having to play different roles than they would if they didn't have a sibling with a chronic illness or a disability or congenital heart condition. So yeah, where does that conversation start? It is just emerging in academics. So if it's just emerging in academics, usually they say that wave takes a really long time to build into mainstream conversation. So I guess that's what you and I are doing, is building that into mainstream conversation. And it's really, really important. And your other question was,
I don't like
how?
really long times.
Pardon?
Yeah, I don't like really long times. So we gotta speed this up. We'll find a way. Sorry,
Okay.
I interrupted.
Oh no, that's okay. What would you like me to talk about now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, please.
All right.
Sorry, we have a bit of a lag going on. So yeah.
Okay. All right. It's probably my Wi-Fi. I'm in Powell River. It's pretty remote. So working with toys and play really, really helps kids uh, process and communicate to us what's going on for them. Sometimes if you watch a child with toys, you'll see exactly where their emotions are, and also where they're developmentally ready to go with their feelings.
Can you unpack that a bit? Like, let's say I'm a parent watching my kid who's a patient play,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and I have like someone like me with zero understanding of mental health aside from, hey, it's really important. What am I watching my kid do, and what my takeaways should be?
Yeah, that's a good question. Why don't we take your earlier conversation about train conductor? What if there's a child who's playing with trains, and when they're playing with trains, their trains are actually all falling off the track? And they're playing with them and they fall off the track, and they're playing with them and they fall off the track. If a parent comes up to a child, or a counselor or someone working with the child comes up to the child and actually kind of sits there and asks the child about what's going on, and how are the trains feeling, and what's happening with the trains. A lot of times the play is a child making sense of their world. So I mean, there's so many different stories that could go on there, but maybe the trains are frustrated, or maybe the trains, there's so many different, each child's story is really, really different, but kids don't have the same language adults do, so they can use play to integrate and understand their experiences. I used to draw scars on all my dolls. All my dolls had surgical scars. And I was curious, like, what would have happened if some adult had taken the shirt off one of my dolls and seen that and asked me. No one did. No one knew they were there. It was my little secret, but that was a way that I was playing through what was happening to me.
You had mentioned siblings, and I'm wondering how lucky I must have been. So my brother is barely a year and a half younger than me. I actually asked, after one of these episodes, I asked him, like, hey, do you think you have medical trauma from my stuff? He goes, keep in mind, he's an attorney. He's a very smart guy, but his response was basically, no, shut up. I'll fight you. Like, just typical brother nonsense. And I really benefited from him being, I hate to use the term normal, I really do, but I benefited from him not having the cardiac experience I did, because I could compare myself to him and figure out what, what is normal, what I should be doing, how again, normal, hate that word, but it was kind of a benchmark for me. And as long as I could keep up with him, I was fine. As long as I could keep up with him, I didn't have to feel any different. Actually, reminds me of a story. He's my size now, but he was a lot smaller than me growing up. He was a small kid. We were in elementary school, and I remember some kid making fun of me for my scar when we were outside playing catch. And I said something back to him, and the kid nailed me in the stomach with a football, and I hit the ground. And when I came back up, my little brother, who was maybe half this kid's size, had him on the ground and was pressing his face into the hot Arizona asphalt. So I felt
Mhm.
very lucky to have a brother like that that was my benchmark and was my friend. But a lot of these kids don't have that. I mean, they'll have friends, but it's like you said, how play becomes so important. On that, how can, I mean, if we tell the parents that, there's going to be some trauma associated with this and you can observe through play, but what could we do? I mean, with play or with some other avenue to help these kids maybe not feel so stressed, make them feel more included,
Mhm.
more safe. I
Yeah.
mean, one of your two major takeaways from your thesis, you said, were building that sense of safety. How do we do it? What can I do right now to help someone feel safe?
I think the biggest piece of safety is relationships, strong relationships, where the person that's going through the difficult time, so when the child can feel seen and be going through something that's hard and having someone still attend and attune to them. So like be there for them, and actually see it, which is really hard in family systems for kids because they see their parents' pain. And oftentimes kids will actually end up protecting their parents. So sometimes this has to be someone from the outside, whether it's, I think in the States you have child life specialists. Sometimes we have that in our hospitals here. So some other adults or safe humans around as well to see that child's experience and to be there for however they want to communicate it. And sometimes we react, like we adults react when it's an aggressive thing. So if a child is like playing aggressively or saying something aggressively, we can respond by not, not wanting to be around that. So how do we actually honor that? Hey, that kid's really angry right now, or that kid's processing something that's really, really hard. I mean, having congenital heart disease, how many of us can say like people people were inside my body touching my heart? Am I angry about that? Yes. I'm also super grateful, but I'm angry about that too. Right? So it's being able to be present and honor what the kids are going through and listen to them.
And aware and honor what they're going through and listening to them. Listening to
Yeah.
them is great and building that system. I did cringe a bit when you were talking about, yeah, someone was inside my chest touching my heart. Sometimes I forget that and I think about it. I'm like, oh, that's, ugh.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets even worse if you think about like the bypass and the ECMO and the stuff you're put on as a baby that, keeps you alive while they go ahead and poke and prod.
Yeah. Yeah. I used
my
to,
my first surgery was open heart where they repaired. Sorry,
you go and
my
then I'll
first
go.
surgery was open heart where they repaired the pulmonary valve and a VSD, a hole in the two lower chambers. So they were like in there, and it's good now. But God, I just makes my skin crawl a bit, even all these years later, to know that they were like, "Hey, we're gonna open this, poke, poke, poke."
Mhm. Yeah. My ribs feel a bit sore even talking about it as well, right? And there you go. There's our bodies remembering. When I had recent ablations, I used
Yeah,
to tease my doctor by asking him to write words on my chest to kind of get over that, right? Like, okay, how about if you write faith or you write some like powerful word, and he'd say that. Yeah, I'm going to do that, Megan. So I almost imagine that on my heart, right? The it's like bravery written in my actual heart.
yeah. I kind of feel like Harry Potter when we talk about this. My scar tingles.
Yeah. Yes, I know exactly what you mean. And yeah, many people don't, but there's so many kids out there and adults out there that know what we're talking about.
So all that being said, what major takeaways have I not asked about yet? What experiences? What should I be doing? What am I not even aware of? Like I wasn't aware of the trauma that I may have faced. A lot of people probably aren't. What questions do I not know to ask to to you? Like what should I be asking to go ahead and relay to the audience?
Well, I think one really interesting part that I learned about through my research that really connected to me is the concept of interoception, which is in the feeling of inner safety. So the scanning of your own self to know that you're safe. And for people who have had arrhythmias or chest pain or any of the numerous symptoms that happen with congenital heart disease, that that interoception, that those feelings are actually from the inside, and that's so different than traumatic experiences or adverse experiences from the outside. There might have been like a surgery would be something that would be an environmental factor, but there's also that the feelings that happen inside and how we actually respond or understand those feelings inside. So, for example, I've always had arrhythmias. So that's a sense of panic when you can't actually control your heart, and all of a sudden it's going so rapid that you're going to pass out, and then you're feeling all of this anxiety, and there's this huge buildup inside. And I think that's one of the reasons why medical trauma is still confusing to talk about for so many people that don't understand it, because it's not some incident that happened. It wasn't just like one car accident. It's something that we have inside of us that we have a relationship with. And I always talk about myself. I have a relationship with my own heart, but it's a really complicated relationship. It's not very simple.
So it's more than just what we experience. It's how we perceive what we experience. Where I could have a minor, comparatively minor, oh, I had a heart flutter, I had a palpitation. I go to the doctor, they say, oh, it's just something normal that happens when you have a bunch of surgeries on your heart. And that is coming from experience. But it's not so much the palpitation, it's the palpitation, how that makes my body feel, the anxiety thereafter, waiting for the appointment, and then maybe even the way the appointment went. It all becomes part of the trauma.
Yeah. It's really, the trauma is the story of the experience, not actually the experience itself. And it's how we understand that story, which is why it's so, so important to look at kids, because yes, they're resilient, but they are also going through so much that they're not able to communicate. And they have those stories.
The trauma is the story of the experience, not the experience. That is a fantastic way to phrase a very difficult concept to understand. We are coming up on time here, but something I like to ask all of my guests, and something that's going to be especially important to ask you, is after everything you've been through, your experience and how that led you to where you're at now, everything from selling tickets to founding your own therapeutic practice, when it's all said and done, what does CHD mean to you? And I don't mean the textbook definition, malformations in the structure of the heart present at birth. What does it mean to you when you think about CHD, emotionally or logically?
I think about having congenital heart condition as kind of like my heart is my home, and my home has really weird doors that maybe don't shut in the same way, or maybe they open in a different way. And I identify myself as really creative, kind of rebellious, outside the box thinker. And I think my heart really aligns with that. And I love meeting people like you who also can relate to that. Like, I used to draw all these terrible pictures when I was a teenager of my deformed heart. And, but that now deformed is almost a beautiful word to me, because it's led me down a journey that I wouldn't have had before. And I'm able to be present in ways that I might not have before. It really is a gift to be born like this. It's a challenge. Oh my gosh, it's a challenge. And that is as big as the beautiful parts. I just want to say that and name that. Being born with a different heart rhythm and having all the challenges that I had, and also school challenges like you were mentioning for yourself. Like, all of that happens as well. But then there's this quirky heart that I have that gives me this unique individual connection with people like you.
My heart is my home. I really love that. It's it's thematic. Everyone I've spoken to, both on these little podcasts and outside of it, it's almost like those of us with heart defects, we might have physical limitations, but mentally it's like we're, the X-Man or the mutant in The Witcher, or any kind of, not so much ostracized, but any kind of separate community with its own challenges, but it's also its own kind of superpowers. Incredible resilience, incredible determination, and a overarching theme of, I am lucky to be here. I know I am lucky to be here, and I'm going to make the most of the time I've been given, because I know how fleeting life can be at the end of the day. My defects make me very, having your heart taken out, played with like sashimi, makes you really aware of how quickly something can go wrong, and how the health you have today you might not have tomorrow, and just maximizing what you get. It's kind of beautiful hearing patients turned mentors, turned advocates, turned therapists all come to the same conclusion of, I am damn happy to be here, and I am a better person mentally for my physical limitations.
Well said. I love that. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to go ahead and do our walk off now, but Meghan, thank you so much for being here with me. I really appreciate your time. And that was Meghan Stewart of Hands to Heart Therapy out of Vancouver. You can learn more about her practice at hands2heart.online. Again, that is hands, HANDS, 2, TO, heart, you know how to spell heart, .online, not .com, .online.